we are going to really focus on the successful transition to the unified interface. So it's going to be a bit more practical and deep dive. The session objectives for today are really focused on that transition and how it should start from a business assessment of your current implementation and application, the selection of a transition path to the unified interface, the preparation and planning that is required in this transition initiative, how to determine the value proposition there is in migrating to the unified interface, because it's really a business value driven initiative to transition to the unified interface, and then how to execute that plan. So first, so the business assessment, which is really about setting a firm foundation for a successful transition and understanding your existing deployment alongside your current business needs to ensure that transition makes a productive difference to the user. It's really important that this is not an IT-driven project, but rather a business value-driven project. So in order to understand the current state, there are a few key questions that you might ask. For example, does your current deployment align well with the way the organizational processes work in your organization? Or are there any areas which are no longer relevant or inadequate for the user? Do you have a clear idea on future considerations for the business? Because this will help you build really a plan and build, what you want to accomplish and this transition to the unified interface. And it's a good opportunity here to rethink that. So because the situation that customers often deploy and grow footprint, but rarely revisit existing areas to optimize for changing business behavior. So this leads to unused functionality, sometimes gaps in business processes, lack of adoption. But this is the opportunity to observe, understand, simplify, rework, test and deploy new versions of your processes. And there are 4 main pillars here. The power of observation. So understand your business user before setting plans. They will help you, really define what you need to accomplish in your application. Identify patterns and groups of users for potential applications, and we'll get into more details about that later. Sweat the small stuff. So look for the small changes that make an impact. And of course, what is really important, and this will be, a common theme in this presentation, is think about really capturing current state. So measure and spot potential opportunity areas. So this could be in terms of efficiency, the time that is spent on processes, the outcome for the customer, because measures will help you really define the success of your transition project and where you want to improve your application. And then the business value planning part, where you should really be engaging the business early and throughout your migration project. Limit distractions on the deployment. So this, we get into more details as well, but unified interface is a great opportunity to have your users really focused on their role and have an app that is really tailored for them. Focus on delivering insights, not data. So insight meaning data that you can really act on and not just KPIs that don't really matter to you. Measure outcome and prepare for refinement. Agree common guidelines and partnership, and we'll get into more details about that when we discuss governance and involving the business in this project. Business value driven design. So this is really important to establish priorities in your backlogs of things that you need to change or improve in your project to make sure that there is business value behind that. Align to supportability and product roadmap to make sure that you make the best use of the platform and it is supported and future-proof. And of course, in terms of change management, communicate a lot around this initiative. When you involve your users, you communicate, you set expectations, etc. Now, to get there from legacy web client to unified interface, you need to select a transition path. So there are two main paths for most users that are online. So you can either first choose to go with targeted apps and start with an incremental approach. So only starting with a few apps that are on the unified interface and the rest that are still on the legacy web client. The benefit is that it's easier to get started and the end user impact is minimized as transition is done in waves. If you have any areas that you know are impacted by issues or gaps, you can avoid them to just focus on the processes that are really working well out of the box. And this is a great opportunity to have team learns from the experience. So that with the first app that you deploy, get feedback from your users and improve that app before moving on to other apps. Now there are some drawbacks because that means that you would have two user interface styles to support and maintain. It also means that users on the legacy web client do not get the performance and usability benefits from the unified interface, but at the same time, this can create momentum and a strong will from your users to all migrate their application to the unified interface. And also, users still on the legacy web client do not get updates, new features, or updates for bug fixes. The other path that is possible is to go all in on the unified interface and to replace the legacy web client entirely. So the benefits is that it's a single user interface to support and to maintain. All users get performance and usability benefits from the unified interface at the same time. And it is regularly get updated with the latest bug fixes, but also new features and enhancements. Now the drawback is that the Big Bang approach is riskier, and this means that all issues and gaps really need to be considered beforehand, before the switching on the unified interface only mode. And this means that all users are impacted. So this means that training and change management must be done so that everybody is ready on the day you do the full transition. And the other transition path is for our on-premise customers who are moving from earlier versions of Dynamics. And this means a lot of things, sometimes common with online, but we know that for on-premise deployments, people have usually integrated more unsupported code or customizations. Often there are some client APIs that have been deprecated, and it might also record integration patterns to be updated to work with the cloud. So the unified interface transition for this type of customers could seem like it's going to add to the workload, but we really strongly believe it is offset by doing the training and change management once, but also by all the value that brings unified interface to the table. So please, if you're moving to on-premise to online, consider going straight to unified interface so that there is a big value for your users and they will really notice the difference from going from on-prem to online. Now, regarding all of the pre-planning activities, this is the opportunity to establish a work plan for a successful transition to the unified interface. There are a number of steps here and to get you started. And so one of our recommendations is that you start with the Power Apps Solution Checker. This will help you check your solutions, customizations, and code to identify any deprecated client APIs. And also it's an opportunity to benefit from recommendations from the tool on your customizations and custom developments. We recommend that you check your ISV and add-ins compatibility. test your application in a unified interface only mode as is to identify any missing gap. So this is an important point here. It's very easy, as you've seen in chapter 2, to test the unified interface. It's only a single switch to activate. And it's very important that you get some business users test your application to see how, without doing anything, it behaves in unified interface to really assess the scope and the work that needs to be done. Identify replacements for deprecated client API code and features. So we'll talk about that later on. Define your app strategy and settings. So this is really important, and I think this is the most exciting feature here in the unified interface. It's the ability to really have different apps for different user roles. We'll get into that in more details later. It's also about defining your governance and ALM, so application lifecycle management strategy, to get user feedback early on and frequently throughout the project. Review your app and navigation UX fundamentals. It's a quick checklist of things to make sure that they are okay before rolling out your app. There is an optional step here, which is about really optimizing the user interface and user experience. And we'll get into that later. Then, of course, it's the time to build your apps, do your non-regression testing to test your key business scenarios, do your user acceptance testing, and then the go live. And this part, we want it to be a cycle for you, an incremental opportunity to really not do it just once, create an app and leave it as is, but do it in a manner that you can capture user feedback and keep improving the app with for example, it's always a good time to go back to that optional step I will discuss in more details later, where you have a lot of quick tips on how to optimize the user interface so that you continue to bring value to the table and move in small steps. Transition to unified interface must not be a complex project, but rather a quick win project where you can quickly move away from legacy web clients and start getting value from the unified interface. So first, I discussed the Power Apps Solution Checker. Also, what is it? It's simply a tool that will check your solution customizations and custom code. So this checks plugins, custom workflow activities, HTML and JavaScript resources, and SDK message steps configuration. To access it, simply go to make.powerapps.com, select your development environment, and then go to solutions. And from there, it's very easy to start the solution checker on any of your unmanaged solution to run the solution checker. And the output of this is an Excel file that will give you a summary as well as detailed results where you have your issues by category, by severity, and also recommendations on how to, for example, if it identifies a deprecated code, how to replace it. So it's really a lot of value from it to optimize your customizations. Second thing is if you are using ISV or third-party add-ins, is to check that they are compatible indeed with the unified interface. So if you've installed them through AppSource, you should check if upgrades are available in the Dynamics 365 Administration Center in the solutions part of your environment. If there is an upgrade available, you should see the option and be able to upgrade the solution. If you're using any other third-party add-ins, either provided by your partner or an ISV, then contact them to see if there is an updated version of the solution that updates the apps to the unified interface. Now, we understand that there are times where your add-ins or ISVs don't get an updated version compatible with the unified interface. So, and that's why it's very important to tackle that part early on, because in that case, you will need to plan and identify a path to replace these features with either native platform capabilities. For example, if you are using an ISV that brought editable grid features, then you can replace it with out-of-the-box editable grid features, or you need to identify new third-party solutions that are compatible. I put a link at the bottom to help you migrate your apps to the unified interface. The other thing to do is now to test your application in a unified interface only mode, as is, to identify any missing gaps. And this one is very, very easy to get you started on. And it's important to have your business users do it, because that way you get a first look at your application rendered in the unified interface, and you don't have to do anything apart from switching on an option. And you get more details on that in chapter 2 of the playbook. Test your business scenarios and customizations, focusing on what could potentially be impacted by the unified interface. So think about your business processes with the business process flows, your business roles, your customizations, if you had any command bar buttons that were custom, if you had web resources, if you had custom rendering of charts. It's not a limited list. These are just examples, but really check that everything is working okay. And also challenge it. Is everything meaningful and adding value when looking back to your application? What should be removed? What should be improved? What should I add to my app? And it's a really good opportunity, for example, to ask questions such as, is the current list of views relevant? Or are my users always forced to create their own views? That's a good way to really think about, from your user perspective, is it optimal? That way you can identify gaps. So any potential gaps and regressions that weren't spotted by the solution checker or the add-in and ISV updates. Identify user pain points that could lead to optimizations or to specific training. And also spot any other dependencies on the legacy web client that may still exist. For example, if you're using the old Outlook.com add-in instead of the Lightweb app for Outlook, now is a good time to consider moving away from this and to the new Dynamics 365 app for Outlook, which is already leveraging the unified interface. And so it's a good time to identify opportunities. For example, positive experiences from your users' feedback that will help you build up the value proposition of the transition. For example, better load times, better overall performance, reduced number of clicks to perform an action, etc. And really spots any opportunity for any potential optimization for smoother transition of business processes, user interface, and user experience. Now, identifying replacements for deprecated client API code and features. So to do that, you should have some inputs coming from the Power Apps Solution Checker, and also from the information contained in this page on deprecated client API and features, which is on Microsoft Docs. You should already have a good understanding of the customizations and features that either need to be corrected or replaced in your unified interface project. I'll give you a few examples. Client APIs. So we've already listed a list of client APIs that were deprecated with recommended replacement methods in this article. We also have recommendations to replace dialogues as they have been deprecated and do not work in unified interface. Or if you are using service scheduling in the legacy web client, we also have recommendations on replacing service scheduling. And this is a limited list, and we really encourage you to frequently keep an eye on the important changes, deprecations page for any announcements for deprecation and help for transition. Now, let's get to the core of the transition, which is going to be about understanding apps and defining your app strategy. So first, it's really important that you understand the concept of apps in the Common Data Service. Apps were previously referred to as app modules, and they are now known as model-driven apps. So they are a type of Power Apps alongside Canvas apps, and you should know that multiple apps can reside on top of a single Dynamics 365 or Common Data Service environment. Why are apps useful? Because apps can help you tailor the experience on a per user role basis. So think of it as a container for the user experience. For example, with apps, a salesperson can have a completely different experience than a customer service representative, even though they are using the same environment and the same data. You might already know some apps because if you've installed the sales module, you have the Sales Hub app, you have the Customer Service Hub app, you have multiple apps residing within the same environment and offering a different experience. So what can be included within an app? So there are quite many things. The app can have its own URL, so the user can directly access an app without having to choose from a list. You can customize its icon, you can customize its welcome page. I think it is still a very underused feature, the welcome page, because it's a great opportunity for users when they log in the first time on your app to be displayed with a welcome page that could give them, a few tips on how to use the app, what has changed, etc. You can associate security roles with an app, and that's how you make sure that, for example, your sales people access the sales app and customer service people access the customer service app and don't see the other apps and don't get confused. You can associate mobile offline profiles, so to really target mobile scenarios where users will need to access the data offline while using the mobile app. You can have different navigation, so sitemap per app. You can handpick the dashboards that will be included in your app. You can handpick the business process flows, and for each entity, you'll be able to pick the forms, views, and charts that are included in your app. So really, it's a container for the user experience. Now, how to define your apps? I suggest that you ask yourself the following questions. First one is, can you today split your users into multiple groups with specific business processes? Second, do these groups have different requirements for what they should see and do in the application? And third one is, are you finding it difficult to have different user experience without using apps today? I'm asking this because it was already possible, at least since CRM 2011, to associate different forms to a security role, for example, or dashboards. But it now became even easier than that. And so if you've answered yes to these questions, then consider having multiple apps and consider it as an opportunity to rethink the experience in the context of your users' business processes. Another question that you might ask yourself here is, should I use out-of-the-box apps, for example, the Sales Hub, or should I customize my own apps? And there is no straight answer here. That depends how tailored you'd like the experience to be. If you have a little level of customizations, or if you want to benefit from first-party app updates, then consider using native apps. If you want more control over the experience, or the updates of standard apps and customizations, then create your own app. There's no really straight answer here. It's really your choice. And once you have defined your app strategy, what should be the next steps? The first one would be to customize your target apps and only include what users will need in them. And truly, the less, the better for them. And don't forget to dissociate security roles from unused apps so that your users will only see what the apps they need to use, apart from the Dynamics 365 app for Outlook app if you are using that one. Now, in terms of governance and application lifecycle management strategy to get user feedback early on and frequently. So this project of moving away from legacy web client to unified interface should really be considered in your already existing governance and ALM strategy. But we'll get through a few fundamentals of it. Because unified interface is all about the user experience. So please do put your users at the center of that initiative. So set up governance teams where the business is involved and follow design guidelines and patterns that you have either you can define within your organization or have shared guidelines. You can approach the project with a minimum viable product approach, so MVP, to start small with your app, to handpick a few processes and pilot users to get started very quickly and prioritize work based on the business value. Listen to your users, get user feedback frequently. You should always think about the ways that you offer your users to easily provide feedback. It's very important that they know how to reach out to you and say what's working and what's not working, and listen and follow up on that feedback. Iterate in small cycles. So you don't have to go all in and just do one version of an app. You can consider really improving the app gradually and continue to involve your users by doing so. And of course, measure by defining and tracking KPIs. So for example, this could be really, it's based on your business, but it could be the clicks to perform a task, the time it takes to finish a process, data quality indicators, etc. And measure improvements over time, because this really, it will be demonstrating the business value of your project. And do that in a way that you iterate. So have your users test their business scenarios and apps, iterate the apps, have the users come back with new feedback based on their new test, iterate again, etc. Now, in terms of application lifecycle management, things don't change fundamentally here, because model-driven apps are solution-aware, just like your standard customizations. So things don't change here. You should continue to use solutions and add your apps within the context of a solution. It is recommended to export your solutions as managed from development to test and production. And you can continue to follow a structured ALM process here to deploy your customizations from the development environment to your other environments. And to go beyond that, the Unified Interface project could also be, the opportunity to consider automated testing. So we have a framework for that is called Easy Repro. And also it's a good case to consider automated deployments. And we are now offering tools which are called perhaps build tools for Azure DevOps to help you automate your deployments and make them safer, and to automate, to deploy more frequently your updates, and to automate your tests. Now that you have defined your apps, it's a good opportunity before going live to do a first check and review your apps and navigation UX fundamentals. So there are a few tips here. Don't forget to include all required entities in your app, even though they are not in the sitemap. So it's very important to differentiate from what should be in the sitemap, basically the entities your users need to navigate to, or your dashboards, or whatever they need to see in the UI, and what needs to be in your app, but not necessarily in the sitemap. So for example, you could want some quick create forms for entities that are not necessarily part of the sitemap. Or you could also tailor the list of entities that are available for selection in party list. The party list field is, for example, the the recipient of an email. You need to, for example, if you want to send an email to Q, you need to make sure that the Q entity is part of your app. Don't forget to provide the model-driven app read privilege in your security roles. Otherwise, your users won't see the apps at all. And whenever your users don't need to use the legacy web clients anymore, don't forget to enable the unified interface only mode. It's a great option because that way unified interface will really become the default experience in Dynamics. Don't forget to create a simpler app URL. This can be very useful if you have users that need to access multiple apps. You can customize the URL per app, as I shown in the example. And try to limit the number of apps a single user can access. This might not be always possible, but when a user only needs one app for, say, for example, a salesperson only need their sales app, well, if you make sure that with their security role, they can access only one app, and if the unified interface only is set to yes, then when these users have access the root URL of your implementation, then they get automatically redirected to that app. So it's a tip to have a simplified user experience. Otherwise, if a user has access to multiple apps, if they go to the root URL and if the unified interface only mode is on, then they get displayed with the list of apps they have access to. So they need to choose the app they want to enter. It's important to optimize navigation, so the sitemap. We advise you to find only one main area in your navigation with the most used sub areas. So these are dashboards, entities, etc., organized in groups. Make it easy. The first page, so the first page of an app where you must have really the most used business processes, business entities that your users used. Don't overload it with all the entities that you might use in your project. These might not be useful for your users. And if you need to have these entities, consider using one or more additional areas for the less used features. So if you have lesser used entities that store configuration, settings, and whatnot, create them in the separate areas, because the idea here is to help your users focus only on what's important to do their work. And last but not least is about icons. Really, it's a good opportunity to make it pretty. And moving to the unified interface is the perfect opportunity to refresh your app icons and move away from the custom entity default puzzle icon. And by doing so, we strongly recommend that you prefer a vectorial format such as SVG, because it will always render well regardless of the screen resolution. And there are a lot of free libraries that provide icons. And we've put at the bottom some recommended SVG format that you could use in your application to really make it shine. And you don't need to copy paste what I'm showing here, because this will be shared in the deck. Now, if you want to go further in terms of user experience, this is an optional step that can really integrate your cycle and iterations here and help you rethink and optimize the user interface and experience. So here, it's a UX cheat sheet to make your users love your app by making it simple. So it's packed with information, but we try to really concentrate everything on a one-pager that will help you first think about all the unified interface exclusive features that you can use and that are not available in the legacy web client. So such as the welcome page, which is a great opportunity to guide users in their first steps when they use your apps. Use existing custom controls to improve the usability of mode field types, especially on mobile. For example, you could replace 0 to 5 whole number field with stars to rate, for example, to give a rating. You can replace a view of appointments with a calendar view. You can replace a subgrid view with card forms, etc. So it's a great opportunity to leverage all the existing custom controls that are already available. Leverage the Power Apps component framework to add even more custom controls to your application. And the community has been very active on this, and there are many really great examples of what you can do with Power Apps component framework. It's also an opportunity to think about embedding Canvas apps in your forms to easily extend your application. So there are no code or low code extension of your app without the need to develop custom HTML, JavaScript web resources. And also it's also possible to embed Power BI reports and tiles in forms to consolidate data across multiple systems in a single view. And then the list goes on with recommendations really to optimize forms, because rendering in unified interface is a bit different. It offers also features for your forms such as the reference panels to bundle multiple views, quick views, and KB search feature in a single place, to configure the timeline and its default behaviors to replace, the activity pane and notes pane. Optimize views, challenge the number of views, number of columns to make the information clearer, to optimize performance, optimize dashboards and charts. For dashboards, very important that you configure the new timeline component to display activities and posts in a single component. Consider leveraging interactive dashboards. So it's a one-stop workplace that allows global featuring across dashboard components. There are special types of dashboards that are really nice to consider for some business scenarios. Clean up the metadata. So this part is really important because in many projects that I've seen, users get very confused when they use, for example, the advanced find to create their own views, because they are often overloaded with fields that don't contain any data because they are not used in the project. So it's very important to just exclude these fields and relationships, try to hide them from the advanced find so that whenever users do a query, they only see the fields that are really meaningful for them, and also the fields that are actually used in your project and make sense to query data on. It's a good opportunity to think outside of the box as well. You can use emojis in the text. So they're a great way to just have a nicer display of information with little icons without doing any specific coding. And last but not least, make help easy. So you can already, customize the help icon in Dynamics so that it redirects to custom help URLs that redirect to your internal help sites. And this can be done both at the global and entity level, or you can install and configure custom help panes and guided tasks. This is currently in private preview, but this will become a great way to really help users and embed help directly within your app to direct them and provide guidance. There will be more on that in the next chapter, chapter 4 of the playbook. And also there is already a ton of tips in the Approaching a User Experience and Unified Interface Transition white paper that is already published. Now, alongside with all of that, which was more focused on really the governance and IT side and all the tips and improvements that you can make in your apps, it's also about determining the value proposition here. And that's why you really need to have a focus on the business side at all times during your project. And to do so, you need to put the user and the customer at the center of the system. So better end user productivity, personal value first, base the design on user personas and their goals and motivations, limit distractions, really focus on user roles. An app is really helping you get your work done. So you don't have to figure out what they should do. It should really be process driven. Focus on insights, not data. So that's, insights is really about acting on things that you see. Measure outcomes and not actions. Because in the end, personal productivity drives business value. Improvement in sales. Productivity implies more sales. Improvement in customer service reduces cost and customer churn, and reduced customer churn implies more revenue. A great app is also a way to reduce training and change management because fluent design is more intuitive. When users can find their own way around an app, they often do not need much formal training. And focus on innovations that add value. Users will adopt this in a viral fashion. Change management is still important. It can be done in new ways, in, for example, user focus groups, or power users sharing their success stories, or with you and users sharing tips and tricks on using the application to be more efficient, and leading to improved user adoption, because this is still one of the top reasons for project failure. And the unified interface is a modern immersive experience that excites users. So this really should help tackle user adoption issues. Personal value drives adoption. And it's not easy to forecast, but if the app delivers personal value, adoption will come naturally. And last, plan and execute your project. So this needs to be done in accordance to your ALM and governance, so that you ensure alignment with the methodology you plan to use. And while doing so keep these pillars really in mind about defining outcome, goals, and expectations. Keeping the eye on the end game is a prerequisite for proper requirements management and project planning. Assess the scope based on learnings and experiences gathered. List out the potential project scope for the system to be transitioned. Very important is prioritizing the scope. Try to rank requirements by business value, then rank them by effort. Deliver quick wins first, and start early with bigger high-value investments and avoid distractions. Whenever you can, deliver incrementally. Regular delivery cycles allow for ongoing learning and gathering of end-user feedback, and measure for success. It's very difficult to judge success after the fact if measures are not pre-agreed and measured before any intervention is made. So that's why it's very important that early on in your project, you define your measures and you track them to see really how unified interface is not just, it's not a technical project. It's really a business value driven project. And finally, manage change as in any of your project. So it's a lot about communication. So set clear expectations to your users, communicate on progress, encourage and listen to feedback, and make sure your project business sponsors are involved throughout your project. Update training documentations that you may have. So refresh existing resources, but consider also new features such as welcome pages or custom help panes and guided tasks for embedded help. Train your users. So this really depends on what you do today through online documentations, on-site, through webinars, etc. Link to existing resources directly from your application so that users don't have to really wonder where is the help. And don't forget your onboarding process for new employees that may join after the trainings have taken place. Support your users, so leverage your existing internal support organization, make sure it is already ready for the unified interface, and consider having local power users for level 1 support and really be the ambassador of the field to really bring back feedback about the application to you to help you incrementally improve the app. And don't forget to celebrate success, because based on the user feedback and measure outcomes, you should be able to really showcase the value of this project and so celebrate success of a unified interface transition. Now, call to action, plan your transition to the unified interface. Next chapter will be on the optimization and really focus on the change cycle, the roadmap, and any related considerations. Let's open up for Q&A.
So If anybody wants to ask a question, we have a few minutes at the end of this meeting. Just post it in, look for the questions and answers in your live meeting, and we'll take care of that. Henri, I have a question for you from Nat. Are the apps driven by security roles? I know you briefly touched on it, but would you perhaps explain that again?
Yes, sure. So you really have to differentiate the security that will drive what your users see in terms of user experience. So, for example, if you have a user that has the salesperson security role, if you associate the salesperson security role with an app, that user will see the sales app. Okay, but that doesn't mean that in terms of data, this is completely different. You could have access, for example, to a single app that doesn't have the, I don't know, let's say opportunity entity in the sitemap, but still by doing an advanced find based on your security role, still have access to the data behind it. So it's really twofold. Security roles here help tailoring the user experience. So the app you see, the views, the dashboards, the navigation, etc. But it also defines what you are supposed to be able to see, edit, delete, etc. in the system, and that's what you configure in regular security roles.
Great, thank you, Henri. I have a second question. Is there a guide how to move apps from dev to prod via the package deployment tool? Let me handle that directly. So apps are solution aware like other components. So in that sense, you should be able to move it as you move any other component, and whatever ALM technology uses is a valid component type for solutions. I trust that answers the question. At this stage, we do not have any other questions. I think